Hello, Saints. We hope you're having a wonderful summer. August is turning to be a very busy month. On the 18th of August, we'll be together with Christian Victory Church in their auditorium for combined service. We will be doing the music and the preaching, just as they did for us the first week of July. Also, on the 25th, we're going to be moving into our new digs, the room outside of the pub. It's a larger area, and we're hoping that everything turns out there and enables us to move a few more bodies in as we've been growing so rapidly, and that's good news. This week's message, I'm going to get an old archived one and put it up for you. And it was so good, I wanted to do two. I don't know if you remember Cheryl Robinson, but she's a professional counselor here in town, and she occasionally spoke at Kawartha Community Church a couple of years ago or a few years ago, and she did two amazing messages. And so I'm going to put them both up so you can listen to one and then you're good to go, or you can listen to both of them. They're both excellent and they're well done. Cheryl's a professional Christian counselor. She has a long history in the Peterborough area. She grew up in the Brethren Church, attended Kawartha Community Church about a decade ago, and is just a wonderful Christian lady. And so I hope you enjoy the message. God bless.
Everyone. It's so nice to be with you all again. And today we're going to be talking about affirming, encouraging, and challenging one another. Pastor Scott always gives me a few months to mull about my topic and kind of think about it a little bit before I have to speak. And as I was mulling over the last several months about it, I was thinking about times in the past where people have affirmed me or encouraged me or challenged me. And I thought of a funny story where I was working for a counseling agency about 10 years ago, and we had two shifts. And one of the shifts was during the daytime, and one of the shifts was more evenings, afternoon and evenings, just to help accommodate clients being able to come in and get support. And so that morning I was out and about doing my banking and getting my running around done and doing my little bit of housework. And when I went into work at 1 o'clock, feeling good about the day, and I see my team leader beelining to me. Now, maybe you have ever worked in a place like this where it's kind of like no news is good news. You can relate to that, yeah? So you don't get a lot of encouragement, you don't get a lot of that positive feedback. So you kind of just do your job, and you're just kind of happy if no one is talking to you, because if someone's talking to you, it's usually, something's gone wrong. So my team leader's beelining to me. She meets me in the middle of the hallway and says, "Cheryl, wow, we just want to thank you for your wisdom, for all your hard work around here. I want to thank you for your ability to handle crises, for your leadership in this team." And I'm sitting there frozen going, is this happening? Is this finally happening? I'm getting the encouragement I need. It's like a balloon filling up. It's like, finally, I've reached the place. And she was just kind of finishing her accolades to me when my friend and fellow counselor Melody walked by and said, "Not that Cheryl, the other Cheryl." And I saw my team leader freeze and then said, forget it, as she walked away. Well, over the afternoon, I found out what had happened before I went in at 1 o'clock. So before I went in at 1 o'clock, there was a client who had come in a mental health crisis. And she felt, she was running through the office, barricading herself. She really feared for her life. And lo and behold, who was in that back room that she barricaded herself with? The other counselor named Cheryl. And so Cheryl de-escalated the situation so well. My team leader came in at 1 o'clock, heard the story, attached that story to the wrong Cheryl, and by accident gave the wrong encouragement. So my friend Melody, for many years after that, if anything positive happened in my life, and she'd be like, "Is it you, Cheryl, or the other Cheryl?" It was like the running joke around there. So hopefully, we won't be getting encouragement like that where it's handed out and then taken back. But we're going to look at, what do we mean by affirming? What do we mean by encouraging? And what do we mean by challenging, to start off with? So how I would define affirming would be something like validation. So what we're doing is we're on the right track, and we're looking into someone's life and we're saying, keep going. So I noticed this morning, I saw your compassion this morning. Keep going with that. Or I noticed how hard you worked on that project. Keep going with that. So people are on the right track, and we're just kind of validating or affirming them in that. But encouraging is a little bit different. I would say encouragement's the next step down. So how I differentiate the two is look at the word courage in encouragement. So we look in the word courage, person's on the right track. They're doing what they need to be doing, but we're trying to instill some courage to help them down that path just a little bit more, get them moving just a little bit farther. And then with challenging, there's two types of challenging, and I bet you if I polled the people in this room this morning and said, what do you think about challenging? We kind of tend to always go to the negative part of challenging, right? Generally, right? But there's two types of challenging. One type of challenging is we're on the right track, and now we're facing an obstacle, or we're facing a barrier. And so we're actually challenging the person to get up over that barrier, or that obstacle. It could be in work life, relationship life, it could be in friends' life, and asking them to kind of get up over that barrier and to meet that challenge. And then there's the other part of the challenging part is when we have to go to people and speak the truth in love, and that can kind of be difficult. That can be hard on us. I was listening to a pastor one time, and he always talked about the times where people came and challenged him. People came to challenge him from his church, from his family, from his friends. And you know what he referred to that as? He referred to it as the times in his life he was deeply loved, where people were brave enough to come and actually speak that truth and truly love him. So we're going to look at these three aspects. So first of all, let's look at our scripture passage for today. And it's found in Ephesians. And the Apostle Paul is imprisoned at this time in Rome when he writes this to the church. And he was working in the church of Ephesus on his second missionary journey, and then for 2 years in his third missionary journey. He's now in Rome imprisoned, and he's writing to the church, and he's saying, I'm going to teach you how to grow up in the church. I'm going to teach you how to be unified together. And so we're going to start off with verse 14 there. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, it grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. So that's going to be our challenge today, is finding out how can we be affirmers and encouragers and people who challenge so we can all be doing the work together. So when we speak the truth in love, that we have an opportunity for that truth to heal us, right? So we have an opportunity for healing. And sometimes when we speak the truth in love, there is a little bit of hurt in that. Sometimes people can feel hurt, and guess what? We can still heal. Right? So that's a beautiful part of speaking the truth in love. So let's start with affirming. Imagine these wells is our emotional ability to affirm others. Okay? So this is our ability to pour out affirmations to others. Affirmations might be scripture verses, it might be statements. We saw the little girl this morning. She had a full well, didn't she? She was working from a full well in that video clip. She was pretty sure of herself, and she was being able to affirm. And so if we think about that dry well there, if we're walking around like a dry well, you know what usually comes out? Usually what comes out is criticalness and judgment, right? But if we're having this full reservoir, that gives us an opportunity to pour out into other people. And without us having the opportunity or taking that opportunity to fill up our well, we might not be able to affirm others in the way that we hope to. So when you think about affirming, it's pretty obvious that people are starving for affirmation, or with the well analogy, people are dying of thirst for affirmation, right? We live in a very critical and a very negative society, and so we need that affirmations. And we need to start with affirming ourselves first. So we need to be working out of a full well. The other point here is that affirmation is a form of love. So sometimes it's pretty easy to go to the neighbor's house and cut the lawn, or make a casserole, or give somebody a quick call, or maybe send a card. I'm suggesting that it takes a lot of vulnerability to affirm others, right? We don't come from a culture really where people are catching people doing something well, and they really spend that time to make that really affirming statement to keep going, right? So there's a vulnerability attached to being open and honest and offering that love in that form of affirmation. Reminding people of their hidden strengths, and then to make it a habit. And this becomes the tough part, because today we might be able to manage going home and saying, I got to make sure I get an affirmation into somebody today, right? But how do we keep doing it Monday and Tuesday? I think it's a bit like flossing. According to my dental hygienist, I should be flossing every day, right? They're very insistent upon that. And so I think this is the sort of thing where this needs to be a habit, where we start to go, okay, did I affirm someone today? Did I catch somebody in an act of doing something positive and affirm them in that? Whether that's my kids, a coworker, if you're a boss, to your employees, to your neighbor, to your spouse. So there's a couple of options here when we go to affirm someone. We can use scripture verses, so that's always, or even affirming ourselves. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or with God all things are possible. But there's very quick, easy affirmations like, you've got this, I can see that you went through hard times before, you can get through this time too, right? So just quick little affirmations reminding people that you're there for them. So that's just a little snapshot of affirming. Let's take a little snapshot of encouragement. So do you remember, affirming is the person's on track. You're looking into their life and you're validating. You're on track, keep going. But encouragement is asking them just to give them courage to go a little bit farther on their track. So excuses people tell themselves about encouraging. If I don't need it, others aren't going to need it either. Or I didn't grow up with any encouragement. Look at how well I turned out. Encouragement's for the weak. I'm one of the strong ones. I've got it together, right? Yeah. People will get dependent on my encouragement if I start encouraging my kids about cleaning up, they're going to expect me to encourage them all the time, right? I'll never be able to get away from it. I'm just not the encouraging type. So this person over here is the encouraging type, this person over here, but you know what? It just doesn't kind of fit with me. It doesn't resonate with me. And they should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and just get the job done. They shouldn't need it. It's always humbling when you go to work on a sermon. You must be the most humblest man on the planet, because when you go to work on a sermon, you start to see all your own weak shortcomings as you work on this. And I was working on this very PowerPoint about how we need encouragement and how we tell ourselves excuses about encouragement, about receiving and giving. And Ryan and Megan, my kids, came home, and they're both Trent students. They're super busy. They don't have much time. And I say, listen, could you just glance over the PowerPoint ever so quickly? It'll just take you like a minute. I just want to make sure I don't have any typos, but I won't do any talking with it. Just giving them an idea that it's a very short thing. So Ryan looked it over, found a couple typos. I changed them. Megan looked over it, said, yeah, it looks great. I don't have any constructive criticism for you, but I do have some encouragement. And I say, oh, no, that's okay, honey. That's okay. I know you're busy. Right? In the middle of my sermon, prepping my sermon about how we need encouragement. Do you see how insidious it is, how it creeps in, right? It's like, oh, no, you don't have to, I don't want to bother you with some encouragement today, right? And so being open to kind of counter some of these excuses we might be telling ourselves today as to why we don't offer encouragement, and also a reminder to ourselves to receive the encouragement when people want to give it. So a couple of points about encouragement. So we need to be encouraging one another. Life is difficult. There's 3 types of people in this audience today. The first type, life is really hard right now, and you're just trying to get through it. The other part is you just came through a really difficult time, and you're just so grateful that you're on the other side. And the third part of our group here is about to go into a difficult time. How do I know that? Because life is difficult. And if we started going through each person, they'd be able to tell us which part of that they're in, right? So life is difficult. We need encouragement from one another. The second point is, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. So I like to think of an emotional thermometer, and 0 to 10. And we always have some stress and some overwhelming feelings in our lives, always, right? 3, 4, 5, right? But it doesn't take long for that to climb up, does it? It doesn't take long to be at 6. Had a busy day at work, get home, unexpected bill, something breaks in the house, dogs barking, didn't take out something from the freezer. It doesn't take long to start to feel overwhelmed, right? Or to start feeling overwhelmed about even the lives of others, our loved ones around us. And so as that climbs, we need the encouragement of one another, and to be able to say, you can get through this. You can draw on the strength from the past. I know you can get through this. And then the last one is, we can be tempted to feel unloved. I always think about feeling unloved like a slippery slope, right? So up here, it's like, no one's calling, no one's checking in on me, right? I don't feel support. Down here is, I just don't feel people are caring about me. It's like a slippery slope leading us down to feeling unloved, right? It doesn't take long sometimes to slide down that slippery slope. I'm seeing some nods so people can relate to that. And so people can feel unloved, and we need to be getting around people and encouraging them. You're not alone. We're there for you. I saw you get through hard times in the past. You're going to get through these hard times too. You're not alone. So now let's take a snapshot onto the challenging part. And this is not challenging. What would we call this? Did I hear reprimanding, scolding? Did you say reprimanding? Yes, reprimanding, scolding. Any other words? Nagging, thank you. Yeah, pointing the finger, right? Pointing the finger at someone else. So when someone's about to go over the cliff, and the cliff could be many things in people's lives, right? But about to go over a cliff, it is a loving thing for us to speak up, like the Apostle Paul is encouraging us to do, and speak the truth in love. So if people are going over a cliff, we want to kind of say, oh, I see a cliff ahead of you, right? Why might we see that cliff and the person about to go over the cliff doesn't see it? I got a couple of reasons. First of all, we could be at a different angle. We could see life a little different. And so they don't actually see the cliff. In the life that we're living, they're so hurried and busied or grieving or hurt that they don't see what's happening. Or maybe we've gone over that cliff and we're kind of climbing up from the edge of that cliff. And so who knows better about that cliff than us, right? So we can kind of speak into that person's life and say, there's a cliff ahead. So that's the loving thing to do. But scolding, reprimanding, shaking the finger, nagging, that doesn't feel like speaking the truth in love. So how might scolding feel? Come up with a quick feeling words. How might scolding feel? Yell it out. Yeah, we might end up feeling embarrassed. Yeah, like we're less than. Yeah, what else? What else does scolding feel like? Degrading, yes. Did you see yours? Degrading, that's a good word, degrading, feeling less than again. What might scolding look like? So we had the finger wagging, that was great. What else might scolding look like? How might we describe it? Blaming, yes. So there could be blaming in that, magnifying the person's behavior. And how might challenging, speaking the truth in love, feel different? What might feel different about being challenged? So being challenged can always feel hard or difficult, but how might it be a better approach than the scolding? Yes?
Trying to come at it from their angle instead of
Nice. So trying to look at it through their lens, what they're going through. Beautiful. What else? How might challenging look different than scolding? Yes? Yes, okay. So we're trying to be reasonable, meeting people adult to adult. Good. We're going to touch on that more a little bit later on. Thank you. Anything else that challenging might feel different? Yes? A judging stance to an empathy stance. So we're trying to really relate to where they're at. Good.
I find it's impossible or really hard to challenge somebody that you don't have any relational
Yes,
relationship with.
yes.
And so a lot of times, if I'm criticized by somebody that doesn't even know me,
Yeah,
it just, it doesn't have the desired effect. But
Yeah.
if I know somebody cares about me and there's some relationship
Yeah.
there, then it's far more effective because you feel safe with them.
yeah. So the challenge is coming out of a safe place. You know the person. So I've come up with a few ideas, and you guys hit on them all. You're so bright. So scolding, you may feel reprimanded, like you're not measuring up, like you're criticized, like you're judged. And challenging may allow for introspection. It may spur action. It could be an opportunity for growth, and it could be a time for learning. It's really important for us when we think about sending a challenge to somebody that we cannot control the other person's response, right? We have no control over that. So let me tell you what some responses might be. Someone might hear your challenge and say, thank you so much, that just helped tremendously, and they get back on track. Someone else might hear you and keep doing exactly what they're doing. And a third person might hear you, get very angry at you, right, and continue doing what you're doing. Let's go back to our cliff analogy. So in the first analogy, the person's heading towards the cliff, and we're saying, whoa, 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 there's a cliff in front of you. That's a loving thing to do. That's what speaking the truth in love is about. There's a cliff in front of you. And the person stops and says, thank you so much, and they back it way up because they don't want to go near that edge. The next person's running towards the cliff, and you say, there's a cliff in front of you, and they hear you, but they keep going over. And then the third person, you say, there's a cliff in front of you. As they run to the edge, they're yelling at you, don't tell me what to do, don't be the boss of me, as they go over the cliff, right? So because we give the challenge in love does not mean that we did the wrong thing if it doesn't go over well. Now, do I think we should spend time of introspection and say, would I have done anything different? Of course we should. We should be doing that in all interactions, right? Would I have changed my tone of voice? Would I have maybe done that in public to make it a little less stressful? Would have met in private to make it a little less stressful? Of course we should have times of introspection, but we can't be always taking on the responses of others. So if people respond poorly to our challenge, does not mean we should stop challenging. So keep reminding ourselves that our job is to try to kind of stay on that side of things where we're challenging, not scolding, but we cannot control how others are going to respond. So what might keep us? What kind of fears are out there that might keep us from being honest? So I've come up with a couple, well, actually David Burns came up with some that I took from him. And one of them is conflict phobia. So try to see if you can find yourself on this list. And if you find yourself multiple times on the list, that's okay. We just know what kind of fears you might be having. So what might keep us from being honest and challenging others? David Burns is suggesting conflict phobia. So conflict is dangerous and should be avoided at all cost. So if I'm going through life making it my mission to make sure that I don't have any conflict, I'm going to be avoiding challenging people, aren't I? Because I'm going to be so afraid of their response that I'm not going to say what I need to be said. What about disclosure phobia? It's unwise to let others know how I feel. So I'm living in such a guarded way that I don't let people know what I think. I don't let people know my heart. And so I'm not going to challenge people because that would have to be me opening up. There's fear of disapproval. I must always try to please everyone. If you're finding yourself in that, you're probably very good at affirming and you're very good at encouraging, right? Because you don't get disapproval from people when you're affirming and encouraging them generally, right? People like that. But if we're always wanting people's approval, then we're going to be potentially not growing up, as Paul asks us to do, and to speak the truth in love. Then there's the fear of rejection. If I tell you what I really think, our relationship will fall apart. I see that a lot with family members that I work with, of people who are in a destructive life cycle, or they have really unhealthy patterns in their lives, or maybe they're in an abusive relationship, and their family member comes to me and say, just tell me how to say it. Just tell me exactly how to say the right thing to this person, right? So that it will be okay, that they'll change. Because they're so terrified of being authentic and saying what it is and having their loved one reject them and their relationship fall apart. And again, we can challenge people and relationships can fall apart, right? Because we can only control our half of the relationship. And so it can sometimes be a litmus test. The more honest we are with one another, the more transparent we are with one another, it's a litmus test for our relationships, right? So if my family can't tolerate me having my own thoughts or feelings or challenging them about something, it's a litmus test of our family, right? Or if my coworkers, if I don't have the ability to give them some feedback about something, it's a litmus test of our relationship. And then the last one is fear of retaliation. If I tell you how I feel, if I challenge you, then you'll punish me. And there's lots of ways we can find ways to punish each other, isn't there? The silent treatment, maybe, talking about the person behind their back, whatever that might be. There's lots of ways they do that. So I'm going to ask you today to kind of go over that list and see if there's something that resonates with you there. See if there's something where you're going, yeah, I can feel that sometimes. I can think I hold back. Because if we expose that fear, we have an opportunity to challenge that fear and then do things differently. So Pastor Scott mentioned about being confronted with somebody that you know, right? And I think generally speaking, when we challenge people, we're challenging people in relationships that we already have. So we've poured into that trust bank, right? There's trust there. We've affirmed them. We've encouraged them. So the challenging part kind of just feels like a natural progression of our relationship, right? Could you ever be called to challenge somebody, going over the cliff, and you don't know them? Of course, it's going to happen. I want to encourage us. I think it's the exception, right? So if you're the type of person who's saying here today, don't worry, Cheryl, I got challenging, looked after, gold star, I'm challenging everyone all the time, right? Too far, right? Come back and practice affirming and encouraging. In fact, I would say to that person who's really good at challenging and you're always doing it, take 30 days off of challenging, right? Give yourself a break. Just focus in on the affirming and the encouraging and pouring yourself into others. And if you're sitting here going, I'm really good at affirming and encouraging, but I haven't been kind of growing up and practicing the skills of challenging, then I'm saying, okay, let's get over here. Let's get over here and start practicing being a little more authentic, being a little more real, and challenging those people in our lives. When I first started as a counselor 12 years ago in a formal setting, I remember so well my first supervision with my team leader. And she said, Cheryl, you got the supportive, encouraging thing down packed. You got it. You're good. Now we're going to work on being more challenging and more directive, because you're going to have to say very, very painful things to people over your lifetime as a counselor. And they're hurting, right? So you're not only saying painful things to people, but you're saying very painful things to people who are already hurting. But that's a loving thing to do. And I didn't have an opportunity to say, I got 50% of it, maybe I'll just focus on the supportive part. It's like, no, we have to have both. So think about yourself on the continuum. I know everybody here has strengths on one side or the other. And think about, where do you need to lean a little more that you haven't been practicing? One trick that I've used over the years, so many times, countless times, that I'd like to share with you, is to ask people's permission to give the challenge. When someone's imminently going over the cliff, don't ask the permission, just tell them, right? Right? Yeah, just that's a time-sensitive measure, right? But if you have time to ask the person, could I give you some feedback? I have a challenge for you today. Could I offer you that challenge? Do you know what I see happen? I see people kind of bracing themselves. They sit up, they get closer to me, their eyes get bigger. We're helping them kind of prepare for it, right? We're giving them choice in the matter. We're giving them a little bit of control. It's that respect piece, right? Where we're not scolding people. We're saying, I see something in your life that you might not see. I'm looking into your life at an angle that you might not see it at, right? And I'd like to offer you that feedback. And no one's declined me. Not everyone's liked the feedback. Not everyone's liked the challenge. But no one's declined me at least the offer, right, to give it. People are interested in that. So asking permission to give the feedback. So, can we go to the next one here? Sorry. So parent, adult, child roles. So many of you might be familiar with this. And the idea, when we think about affirming, encouraging, challenging, we're thinking about relating to people in an adult to adult way. So what does that look like? Well, if I slip up into that parenting role, and by the way, if you're parenting children under 18, keep parenting them, right? But this is just in other relationship, right? And if your kid's here, just keep being the kid, right? But in all other relationships, we need to be relating to each other adult to adult. So if we slip into that parenting role, we get scolding, we get reprimanding, we get judgy, right? And then what happens with the other person is sometimes there's like a counter reaction to that. And they slip down into a child role. And what might that look like? So you're two adults talking to each other. I get all judgy and scoldy, right? Scoldy, I just made up another word, scoldy. I do that when I get in front of people. And the person slips down into a child role. What might that look like? Give us a description. Give us some words to describe what that might look like. How might someone slip into a child role? What might they be saying at that time? How might they be looking? How might we know that this is not going in the right direction? Yes. Pouting, good. Yes, so the pouting, good. What else? Whiny, yes. Oh, hiding. Okay, so whiny. Yeah, whiny. Hiding, so hiding behavior. Good. Yes, Mike.
I don't wanna make me alone.
Yes. Good. So that overreaction, we'd see that there. Yes. So they might actually be shrinking, right, Kelly, in front of us. Yeah. So this is just a nice little model for us to keep into our heads, is how can we keep this so adult to adult? Even think about affirming and encouraging. Have you ever had anyone give you encouragement, but it felt a bit patronizing? Like they were feeling a little bit like the parent, right? That doesn't feel good, does it? You know, always relating in this adult to adult role, like we're growing up together. That's what Paul's saying, grow up together, right? So sometimes we are new in our faith, and that's okay because we're all growing together. We're growing up. And so staying in this adult role where we're respectful of one another, we can be confident with one another, what your needs matter, my needs matter. We have respect, working in that paradigm. So let's go back to our passage about growing up. So Paul's saying, speak the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. So let's grow up together in this. If you're leaning over here and you're a good encourager, let's grow up and start working on those challenging skills of speaking the truth and love to each other with that part. And if you're a really good challenger, let's get practicing our affirming and encouraging skills. We're going to grow up together. Always, of course, remembering that how we grow up is getting into God's word, getting affirmed by him, getting encouraged by him, getting challenged by him, and then out of that, our well will be full. Our well will be full to share with others. I wanted to leave you with an example of this that was so beautifully demonstrated in my life with older Christians who spoke into my life over the years. So when I was growing up, there was a couple who were missionaries for like 20 years, and I got to meet them as a young adult. So here I was, a kid, like 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, going to prayer and Bible study with my parents, and we'd split off into our rooms and we would pray for a missionary. And this was before the day of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all that. And so the elder would type up the prayer requests, and then they would give you your little slip. And you go in, you pray for them. And oh my goodness, I heard about Claude and Marion. 20 years growing up, I heard about them. And then comes the day that they come back to minister in Peterborough, and I got to meet them in real life, as it was. And they were everything I hoped them to be. They were just one of those really godly couples. And so I remember when I was pregnant with Ryan, and I was feeling very insecure about becoming a mom, and feeling very inadequate, and feeling like I wasn't measuring up, and I had a lot of anxiety about motherhood, and what kind of a mom would I be. And Claude, as an older man in our church, would come up to me, put his arm around my shoulder and say, "You're such a good mama, Cheryl. You're such a good mama already. You're such a good mom." And every week he would see me, put his little arm around my shoulder and say, "You're such a good mom. You're such a good mom. You're already taking care of that baby. You're such a good mom." Affirming, 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 right? So then years pass, and the kids, both kids are here at this point, and I'm part of a women's group. And his wife, Marion, was part of that women's group, and she'd be like, "Cheryl, come on up and open in prayer." Now, I grew up in a church that no women participated in any part of the program, ever. So unless you were in a women's group. So if you think Amish, we're going to one step down from Amish, okay? Because you think, am I good? Is it a good description? We grew up together in the same church. So just to give you a view, right? And so this is just not something I have any skills in, right? This is just not something I can do, right? And so Marion would be like, "Cheryl, get up here. You know, we're having a women's group. Come and pray." So come and pray. And then maybe a couple weeks down the road, "Cheryl, get up here, do some announcements for us." I remember she, had me create some guidelines for the group. I think some of the stuff she was making up, right? Just to get me up there, get me going. And then it's like, "Cheryl, can you come tell us your testimony?" And, a couple months down the road, "Cheryl, come lead us in a little Bible study." And then comes the day she says, "I've booked a retreat at Elam, a women's retreat, and you're going to be the guest speaker," right? I really think she booked that thing to make me the guest speaker. I don't think it was like, we need a women's retreat. Who should we choose, right? She's bringing me along, encouraging. So remember, I'm on track, right? And she's just giving me the courage to take the next step. And she's giving me the courage to take the next step. And she's giving me the courage to take the next step, right? And so, my family thinks she opened up Pandora's box there, right? Maybe too far down the road, encouraging me down the path. And then later on in my life, when I was going through a very challenging time, Claude had already gone on to be with the Lord, and I was going through a really difficult time. Not a hard time, but the kind where like the world's falling out from the bottom, you know, that kind of a hard time. And she came to me and she said, Cheryl, don't do anything stupid. Now, I'm a little bit reactive of a person, so someone tells me not to do anything stupid. My first thing is, stupid? You want me to show you stupid? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll show you stupid, right? I'm glad people are laughing because it helps me to know that I'm not the only reactor. And she said, I've seen so many people in times of terrible loss react in a way where they can't take it back. Right? So they do things and they have to pay the consequences for those things. And with tears in her eyes, she said, I just never want to have to see you live with those consequences. And I'm telling you, that challenge was like received into my heart. Do you know what I mean? I stayed on that track because it's like Marion knew just what to say. She knew how to say that truth and how to say it in love. So I wondered if today, if I could leave you with an affirmation, an encouragement, and a challenge. So your affirmation today is, you're a child of God. You're the apple of his eye. You were bought with a price. Keep going. Keep going on your journey. And I want to leave you with an encouragement. You're on track. You're going, but you know you need to take the next step. And you know what that step is. And so the encouragement is, take that step. Take that leap. And could I challenge you today to be real with each other, to grow up together, to not be afraid to speak the truth in love. And before you speak the truth in love, invest in someone, invest in their life so that they'll be ready to hear you and hear your voice. Can we just close in prayer? Father, I just am so grateful to you that when you spoke the truth in love, you did it in your Son. And he came and he taught us how to relate to one another. He taught us how to be brave and speak up when needed and how to encourage. And we thank you for your word that continues to do that in our lives now. And we just pray for courage, for strength, for wisdom as we relate with one another and as we grow up in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
We have a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has a question for Cheryl, you can either text it to me on the number on the screen, or you can just ask it. Scotty, you're wandering around with the mic, aren't you? Or Scott Pierce? Right. Oh, there you go. Blended right in. Someone, question or comment?
Is it safe to say that there's a right way and a wrong way to put these comments or encouragement to people?
Yeah.
There's a blunt way that sometimes you have to be blunt, and other times you have to be, sort of watch what you say and how you say it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I think that goes back to invested in people's lives, right? I need a soft touch. I mean, no one needs to come and give it to me straight. In case anybody wants to come with a challenge, like you don't need to give it to me straight, right? Just be gentle, right? But I work with lots of people. You have to be so authentic and so clear and so strong, or they actually don't hear it, right? And so I'm so glad you mentioned that. There's a spectrum there, isn't it? And some people just need the slightest touch and the slightest word, and other people need it to be stronger, and that's getting invested in people's lives, right, is the secret to that. So thank you for bringing that up. That's important. Thank you. Don't use the same approach with everyone, right? It will not work well. Thank you. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Is it okay to point out, for me, sometimes it's hard to do one thing or the other, to know someone that you know is good at the things you're not good at, so you can sometimes redirect people. I've taken opportunities in life where someone comes to me for something that I'm just not skilled at, and I say, you know what, you really need to talk to Cindy. Cindy's the person you want to talk to about this, because she's able to do this thing that I'm not good at doing. And it's good to, when you're not good at something necessarily, when you haven't reached that point in yourself,
Yeah.
to have someone else you can actually defer to.
Yeah. So you're talking about affirming or encouraging or challenging sort of idea? Yeah. And I agree with you, as long as we're all pushing ourselves to that next step, right? So there's a lot of encouraging people in this church who've encouraged me over the years. I can't just say they'll be the encouragers, right? They're going to be maybe the better encouragers, but they're not just going to be the encouragers. Same with challenging, right? So of course, kind of like do what you're good at, but also push yourself, right, to go and try different roles, try different skills. Is that kind of like going back to that growing up, right? So it's finding that balance, I guess, Mike. Yeah, thank you.
Can we pass the baskets around? Just keep the Q&A going.
Okay.
Outies are going to come around first, then the A's.
I think I just want to push back at Mike there a bit, because if someone comes to you, they really respect you, or perhaps they need what you're going to say. So before you pass it on, maybe they came to you for a good reason, because what you're going to say is probably much more effective than someone else, especially if they don't know the other person as well. So I think your comment, extend yourself, push yourself a little bit, might be appropriate.
Yeah.
More than you think it is.
Okay, so kind of trust yourself a little bit to kind of do what you can do.
Yeah.
And if the person still needs more, good idea to refer them on.
Push them on.
But try.
So,
Nice.
so I do actually have a question as well. When you challenge someone, should you be waiting for a response, maybe not a very nice response, a reaction, shall we say, and actually it might be a little hard to accept the response to your challenge?
Is the question, Quinton, that should I be expecting that the person might not respond well to the challenge? Yeah. There's lots of responses to the challenge, right? So we should be expecting that they hear us, they're grateful for it, they move on. We should be expecting that they listen to us and they keep doing it, or we can be expecting an angry response. I don't want people leaving here today and say, every time we challenge someone, the person's going to get angry, because that's just not realistic. Goodness, people have challenged me, I haven't gotten angry. I've challenged others, they haven't gotten angry, but it's certainly a possibility. And if it's somebody who is an unsafe person, we would never want to be challenging them one-on-one by ourselves, right? If it's an unsafe person, it might be over the phone, it might be with the support of others. Yeah. But yeah, anticipating what that might be like would make it help better. Oh, yes.
Related to that point you made about the going over the cliff,
Yeah.
I was just reminded when Quinton said that, I was thinking there are times in my life when I've experienced people who do a fourth option. They react angry, they don't like what you had to say, and then they realize you're right, but they'll never admit it, and they don't go over the cliff.
Yeah, nice, Mike. Nice. Good. Sure. They might respond angrily to us, but they did hear us, right? Nice. Very nice. Good. Okay. Good.
Cheryl, you give her a hand. We were a little late passing the clipboard around for sign up for pulled pork and apple stuff. And so if you didn't get it today, we're going to keep passing around. I think it's in this section, but everybody over here, if you can sign up if you're willing to bring something, that would be really, really helpful for us. There's a number of ones listed. Just keep going. And if you have to turn over the page, keep going, because there's a lot of us. As you can well see, we're pretty full, and we're probably going to have a lot of people, so lots of food. We'd rather have too much than too little. All right? Why don't you stand? We're going to close in the song. And thank you, Cheryl. That was awesome as usual.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is setting healthy boundaries. And I hope that when we get done today, we're all going to be wondering, why did we put healthy boundaries in the hot potato section? I hope by the end, we're all going to be like, oh yes, makes total sense that as Christ followers, we're going to be practicing healthy boundary setting every single day. So I was supposed to speak actually in September, and as many of you remembered when you saw me hobbling in with my air cast, I fractured my ankle in September. And so it was an interesting piece, because 6 months before I've been thinking about boundaries more, and you're watching a movie and you see a great example of boundary setting, or you're on holidays and you're reading a book and you're like, oh neat, this will be nice in my sermon. And so for 6 months you're kind of mulling on this topic, and then come September, we have these steps up to our house, and our house is on a hill, so it's a full cement step going up. And they were crooked and broken and pieces missing. They were horrendous. I moved into this house 22 years ago, and they really needed to be replaced 22 years ago, right? So we're talking like it was time. And so I got home one day at lunchtime, and the machines were there, and they were tearing out the steps, and we were just so excited because we didn't want anyone getting hurt on these cement steps. So when people would come over, we'd be like, be careful on the steps, be careful, as people came and left. So we put up a little ladder so we can get on the porch. And lo and behold, as irony would have it, I slip on the bottom rung of the ladder and fracture my ankle in this attempt to make our property safe. So I went to Emerge the next day, got my little plan ready, saw the surgeon the next day, came home in a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. And, starting with the air cast, you have to have your crutches, and it's just kind of cumbersome and difficult. And every step you take is so much effort. And I sit down on the couch after seeing the surgeon, and all of a sudden I think, I have to speak in 10 days. And then comes the discomfort of how will I do that? Will I have my crutches? Will I be hobbling still? Will there be pain, right? And then comes the idea, novel idea, when you're speaking about boundaries, maybe I need to set a boundary, right? Maybe this is the time. And thankfully, my supportive husband was there, and I said, you know what, I think it might be a bit much. And he's like, yes, I think this might be the time. This might be one of those times where you say, I found my limit, I got to set a boundary. So I write Pastor Scott this email explaining what happened, and it's going to be quite a few more weeks on the aircast. And he was so gracious, no problem. I've got a sermon tucked away. Don't worry about anything. But what would have happened, right? When you send out an email and you get a response like that, that's like your best case scenario, right? With boundary setting. But what if it had been, well, gee, I don't know what we do without you. Not sure, not even sure if anyone else is available, right? Well, then that's going to become the more the discomfort about maintaining the boundaries. And that's where a lot of the work is holding those boundaries firm. Now, thankfully, we have a good pastor here who appreciates good boundary setting, and he supported this wholeheartedly, but it's the maintaining part that gets tricky. So let's take a look today at what this might be. There's going to be 3 types of people in this room today. There's going to be people in this room who maybe are a bit too rigid with your boundaries. So maybe someone comes up to you and says, could you please? No, right? They're a bit too rigid. They don't even wait to see if they could possibly be of help. Then we got people over on this side who are a bit too loose with their boundaries. So they're always saying yes when they should be saying no. They're feeling guilty if they have to set a limit. And then what we're hoping for is let's try to find that balance. And we're going to talk about how does the Bible instruct us or lead us into trying to find a balance with boundary setting where we're actually setting boundaries so we can do the will of God in our lives, so the purpose that God has set for us. Because these people over here are not actually following God's will for their lives, they're following the will of every demanding person in their life. So they have a demanding neighbor who has a need and they're taking care of that. And they have a demanding relative who has a need and they're taking care of that. And they have a boss who has a need, demanding boss, and they're taking care of that. And they're not actually doing what God has planned for them, right? Because their attention, time, finances are getting divided. So we're going to take a look today, what does the Bible say about boundaries? And how can we maybe find more of a balanced approach in our lives? So let's first of all define some boundaries. So this is a good definition. So a boundary is a guideline or a limit that we set and then we maintain to keep us safe and instruct people around us how to treat us. But boundaries has a bigger definition than this, and we'll take a look at this one. A boundary is a definite place where your responsibility ends and another person's begins. It stops you from doing things for others that they should do for themselves. A boundary also prevents you from rescuing someone from the consequences of their destructive behavior that they need to experience in order to grow. Imagine I leave here today, I'm going down the 115 and I'm speeding and I get a ticket. Justified, right? I'm speeding, I get a ticket. Who needs to pay that speeding ticket? Right? Yeah, 100%. A lot of people are pointing at me, 100%. I need to pay that ticket. Imagine I'm going to be short that month and have to cancel some activities that I really wanted to do. Yeah, I'm going to need to cancel that activity. I'm going to need to feel the discomfort of that in hopes that the next month when I'm driving down the 115, I'm going to be more careful, right? And so we need to find ways that we can help ourselves and help others learn from some of those consequences. So some examples of boundaries. So these are just a few. There's tons more, but let's just look at a few. There's physical boundaries, right? A lot of times in the counseling office or in group counseling, people will say to me, I don't have any boundaries. So in a group setting, people will be like, I don't have any boundaries. And I'm like, listen, everyone's sitting on their own chairs. No one's sitting on anyone's lap. So we're starting off good, right? Because that's a physical boundary that we're sitting on our own space. And when we come and talk to people, we leave a foot distance between each other. That's a physical boundary. When I was raising Ryan and Megan, my kids, when they were young, I was raising them mostly on my own. And you can imagine the demands, being a stay-at-home mom. Ryan was an early bird. That kid was up at 5 a.m. every day. And they'd go to bed like at 8:30 at night. So I had a big chunk of time, right, that I'm raising these two little ones. So we're reading together, we're cuddling, we're going for walks, we're holding hands. There's lots of physical contact. And so what I gave myself as a boundary, as a way to survive these young years, is I gave myself 15 minutes. When I washed the dishes at night, we had a kitchen that was enclosed with a doorway, I would put a baby gate. So Ryan and Megan could see me, they could hear me, they could talk to me, they could say, look, Mom, look at this. And I'd be like, oh, neat, right? So we still had that attachment, that connection, but no one was touching me for 15 minutes. I gave myself that. I thought, you know what? This is going to be a lot of years of child rearing. I got to give myself a little boundary. So as you guys know, Ryan and Megan spend a lot of time at summer camp. So the first year Megan goes off to summer camp with Ryan, they're doing overnight camp. Sometimes you're being woken up 6, 7, 8, 9. I think Ryan won the record of being woken up 10 times one night with the little campers all getting up at different times. She came home and I said, how was your week? It was good. It was exhausting. I totally get that baby gate in the kitchen thing, right? She understood, right? That physical demands of people needing that contact or that touch. There's mental boundaries. So I have my own thoughts and opinions. You guys have some of your own thoughts and opinions, and they can be challenged, right? And we can talk about them. But we also have to respect the fact that we're not going to see everything exactly the same. There's skin boundaries. So skin lets you know where I start, where you start. Skin is a safety boundary for our organs. There's time boundaries, right? So today I'm going to practice time boundaries. I could talk about boundaries for the next 8 hours. We could go through lunch, we could go through dinner, right? But it's not going to happen, right? Because we got to have, everybody here has something that they need to be doing afterwards. So we're going to respect time boundaries today. There's emotional boundaries. So I have some emotions, you have some emotions, we need to respect that. Sometimes we're in the same exact incident, and someone will feel very different about that. And sometimes judgment comes up. Like, I don't know why they're so upset about that, or I don't know why they're crying about that. But that's a boundary that they can have their emotions and we have ours. The Bible has such a beautiful description of this in Ephesians, where it says, be angry, but sin not. Right? So yeah, you can be angry, you can have your emotions, but then you can't break someone's boundary by, smashing the coffee table or hitting someone, because now you're breaking the boundary, right? So you can have your emotions, but you can't infringe that emotion on anyone else. We have financial boundaries, so we have limits, lots of good causes, lots of things we want to support, but there's limits to how much we can support things. We have to find out, what is that ministry that I really want to get behind and support, or what are those few things I want to get behind, because we probably are not in the position where we can provide something for everyone. And if we give away everything we have and we don't pay our rent, our landlords get very upset, right? Or our bankers get very upset when the mortgage isn't paid. So we have to be wise with our finances. We have food boundaries. Right? So there's only so much food that we can consume and be healthy, right? So we have to limit our food intake. And then possession boundaries. So if you've ever spent much time with a 2-year-old, you know that there's a blurred line between possession and boundaries, right? They see mom's car keys and it's like, mine, right? They see dad's wallet, mine, right? And anyone who has toddlers and are thinking, I'm going to miss these years, it comes back. Because when they're teenagers, right? Dad's car keys, mine. Mom's wallet. And that's why we have to keep maintaining these boundaries, from the time our kids are toddlers to middle age to teenagers. We keep maintaining these boundaries for them. No, that's dad's car, right? You can borrow it sometimes, but dad will have it most time. That's mom's wallet, and she might at times give you an allowance, or maybe you do a job and you get paid for it. But the majority of money is going to stay with mom, and we keep maintaining these boundaries over the years to give them that guidance. So if you've ever experienced any of the following, it might be time to get boundary setting a little bit more. So feeling like you're not allowed to set up boundaries, saying yes and feeling resentful. So have you ever, someone asks you to help them move, you have 26 commitments that you have to do, but you're like, fine, I'll help you move. You get there on 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning and you're so resentful, right? It's like, what am I doing here? Saying no, then feeling guilty. So those same friends ask you, you say no, so that was a good initial boundary setting because you have your 27 other commitments, but then you feel guilty all day. It's like, oh, I'm not helping them move. Taking on responsibility for the happiness of others. So we know that there's no way that we can help make other people happy, but we take that on and go, if I just do this bit more, they'll be happy. Or if I do this little bit more, they'll be content. We avoid discussions or confrontations. So maybe you have a coworker or an employee that keeps arriving into work 10 minutes late. They're stealing from the company, the time from the company. But it's like, I don't want to bring it up with them because they always blow up. And then what about this one? Making exceptions for a person that you would not tolerate in anyone else. So sometimes we have people in our lives who are acting in a way that we would never tolerate in anyone else, and we start to make those small excuses for them, don't we? And then we make another excuse, and another excuse, and another excuse, and it would seem like the person just continues to be more challenging and more difficult as we tolerate more and more. So some factors that might contribute to making it challenging, and maybe you can see yourself on this list. So overly strict parents. Notice I did not write strict parents because parents need to be strict and parents need to have good boundaries, right? So I'm 100% supportive of that, parents. Keep that going. But you see the overly part, right? So let's say great Aunt Susie, who your 4-year-old has never seen before, comes to visit. And great Aunt Susie needs to be greeted, right? But great Aunt Susie could be greeted with a handshake, a high five, a hug, whatever a hello, right? Whatever that 4-year-old decides, right? So it's okay to insist that great Aunt Susie gets greeted, but how the 4-year-old maybe greets her is up to them. So back when we were raised, it'd be like, go give your Aunt Susie a hug and a kiss, right? Because that's what our parents deemed as appropriate, and we were kind of forced to do that. But giving people some opportunities to kind of make some of those decisions for themselves. Low self-esteem might be a reason. If I don't feel worthy of being able to have my own life and follow my own plan that God has for me, I might feel like I'm just at the whims of everyone around me. Or if I feel like I'm here to rescue people, or I'm engaged in enmeshed relationships. If you want to see some good examples of enmeshed relationships, just watch a good romantic movie brought up from Hollywood, right? Because Hollywood tries to portray these relationships as romantic, right? But when you look a little bit farther, they're usually very enmeshed and very toxic. And then, of course, if we had childhood abuse or trauma and the big people in our lives move those lines in an unfair way, they were 100% responsible for that trauma. We were 0% responsible. But if that happened in our past, it sometimes blurs the line in adulthood. So sometimes I think it's good to go back to what does the Bible say, and what about God? Does God have boundaries? So you can look behind me here about some of the things that we know about God from His Word, and the Bible is filled with limits that keep us safe, right? Avoid this, right? Because this will happen. That's a limit. That's a boundary setting. Do more of this. That will be good for you, right? All of you today are practicing a boundary that the Bible encourages us to do. It says, stop what you're doing, right? And on the 7th day, have a rest, come together, right? And worship together, right? So we all set a limit. Everyone here has a pressing need that has to be done at home or at work. I guarantee it. No one is sitting here without a need to finish a school project, a work project, shovel some snow, do something, right? But we all set a limit and said, no, the Bible's very clear. We need to take a day of rest and come together in fellowship, right? So everyone in this room has taken that ability to do that boundary. So let's look at some verses together. So we know as Christ followers, our first job is seek first the kingdom of God, right? So that's what we need to do. And if I'm seeking first the kingdom of God, I have to be in my own lane, right? Because if I'm doing everything that everyone else is asking me to do, they don't actually know what my calling is. They don't maybe know what my purpose is. Maybe they don't even care what my calling or my purpose is, right? And so it's my job to stay with what God intended for me to do. So look at these verses on purpose, and there's so many more. It's so exciting when you do a little study on the purpose that God has for you. So may He grant you according to your heart's desires and fulfill all of your purpose. Everyone in this room is representing a different purpose that God has in your life. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His, there it is again, according to His purpose. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. I grew up in the church, and I've heard this verse so much, and all I got was the part about the cheerful giver. Be a cheerful giver, right? So that's something I really attempt to do. Be a cheerful giver. But there's another whole part here as we purpose in our heart, as we make those decisions around where do I want my money to go? Where do I see God working in this city? Where do I see God working in the third world? Where do I see God's hand, with regards to my purpose, where I want to put my money? Those things go together. So we're setting financial limits and deciding where that money goes as we give cheerfully. So all of the boundary setting purpose is for us to live that life of intention that God intends for us. There's a lot of needy and challenging and demanding people in this world, right? And they can prove to be a distraction. And they can take me and veer me off the path that God has purposed for me and distract me from what I really need to do. So a lot of times people say to me, I just can't set boundaries. And it's not really about setting boundaries. It's about struggling to regulate our emotions. So let's take a look at this and tell me what you think, okay? So over here is an emotion thermometer. So 0 is I'm not feeling anything. So everyone in this room is feeling something, right? You might be feeling contentment. You might be feeling interest. Hopefully no one's feeling too bored. So over here, there's like a little thermometer. So we're probably all about a 3 or a 4. We all carried a little bit of stress in today. So we're probably feeling a little bit. 10 out of 10 is when we're completely overwhelmed. We're just swamped. We're overwhelmed. And do you know what humans do at 10 out of 10? They do things that aren't always so helpful. Right? So I think I heard cry, and cry is great. Crying can be very helpful. But sometimes people at 10 out of 10, like they punch a wall, right? That's not so helpful. They use substances to numb themselves down, not so helpful. They hurt themselves, not so helpful. They lash out at people they love, not so helpful. They give in, right? Not so helpful sometimes. So let's take a look at this little barometer, okay? You go home and you have a little toddler there. Maybe it's your neighbor's child, maybe it's your own, maybe it's a grandchild. And this little toddler, 3 years old, is like, I want M&Ms, right? And you're like, oh no, you can't have M&Ms right now. We need to have dinner first. I want M&Ms. And toddlers, when the toddlers get ignored or said no to, what are they going to do? They're going to bring it up, right? They're going to ratchet it up, get a little bit louder, get a little bit louder. And so what's going behind the scenes is you didn't come home with low emotions. You were at work, you were busy, you were doing lots of stuff. You came home like at a 6 or a 7, and you're like, okay, you know what, we got to eat. So you open up the fridge, oh, I forgot to take the food out of the freezer, right? So now we're behind on dinner, the phone's ringing, the dog's barking, and people are laughing because we've all lived these days, right? These are not the best days of our lives. And that toddler gets louder and louder and louder. And what might we do at 10 out of 10 that isn't so helpful? We might hand them the M&Ms, right? Fast forward 32 years. And now you got a 34-year-old coming into your house and they're like, give me $50. And it's like, you know what? We've had these discussions, you got to be responsible for your money. I can't give you the $50. Give me $50, And maybe the 34-year-old, they're going to be a little smarter than the 2-year-old, right? So they're going to start trying to crank up this emotional intensity. So they're going to say things like, what kind of friend are you? Or what kind of mother are you? Or what kind of person would desert me at a time like this, right? Because they know how to crank it up, right? The 2-year-old just gets louder. As we get older, we get more wily, right? And so they're going to crank up that intensity. And at 10 out of 10, if we're not actually finding ways to regulate our emotions, what are we going to do? We might hand them the $50. Now, it's really interesting because I'll say to people, what will happen when you hand them the $50? And you know what people will say to me? Oh, I'll feel guilty. And it's like, no, you don't feel guilty first. You feel relief first, right? Because when you hand them $50, they leave. And the initial thing that happens is you feel relieved, right? But then the guilt sets in, right? It's happened again. I train them again. If you just keep yelling, if you just keep demanding, I'll eventually bend. And so when we're thinking about this emotional thermometer, we want to stay away from or be able to challenge the main emotions that come in with boundary setting. And we touched on this the last time I spoke, but just as a little recap if you weren't here, is we want to stay out of the fog. So the fog, when we have fog around us, what happens? We lose track of the lane we're in, right? So we're supposed to be on a lane. We have God's purpose as Christ followers. We kind of have a gist of where God's leading us. And when it gets foggy, we don't know where to go, or we get off into other people's lanes. And fog stands for fear, obligation, and guilt. So if I go to set boundaries and the fear I feel is, oh my goodness, this person's going to harm me, then of course it's always space. We don't worry about setting boundaries or saying it the right way or explaining ourselves perfectly. We just create space because we want to make sure that we're okay. But imagine it's, I come home, I don't feel well, and I was going to go to the movies with a friend, and I feel fear, like what will her response be? You know, will she still be my friend? That kind of fear has to be challenged, right? Because if my friend cannot tolerate that I feel ill and I can't go to the movies with her, she might need to be moved from friend to acquaintance, right? Because she might not really be a true friend, right? So we have to kind of go challenge that fear and go, you know, is this really realistic? Or obligation. You know, Pastor Scott, you need to visit your grandma in the seniors home, and Pastor Scott says, hey, can you help me pile up these chairs? But grandma's waiting, right? There might be a sense of obligation. Gee, I sat in one of these chairs all morning. Really, I should be helping, right? But there's also that boundary setting that says, oh, Pastor Scott, I would love to help you next week. I got to go. I have another commitment, right? But that obligation might set in. And then guilt. So really, it's false guilt. It's not really guilt because we're allowed to set boundaries. But that guilt is going to come in. It's false. It's going to trick you, right? And go, you're doing something wrong. You're saying no. And often the challenging people in our life are telling us we're doing something wrong, right? So I have this guilt. They're pouring the gasoline on that fire, right? And it's just adding and adding and adding. So how do we find ways to regulate our emotions? Well, eating a little something helps to regulate our emotions. Having a little bit of protein will help regulate. Taking a few breaths will help that. Going for a walk will help regulate emotions. Saying to a friend, can I talk to you? I've got this demanding person who wants this in my life. That will help our emotions. Tuning in and going, what am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling obligation. Okay, how can I counter that? Am I really obligated in this situation? If not, I know what to do. I know to set boundaries. So I'm going to give you a little bit of word pictures because I think we as humans like some word pictures because we talked last time and I used some word pictures, and over the last couple of years people would say to me, oh, you know, I used the electric fence this week, and I'll let you know what that means. And it's like, oh, okay, you know, we're taking these word pictures and we're applying these to our lives. So let's look at the first one here. So how much giving is too much? So we got some givers here getting their backs up. I know it because I'm a giver myself, going, oh, I don't think we can give too much, Cheryl, right? Well, I don't think we can love too much. So let's challenge what love is versus what giving is. Because I can love someone as I put up a restraining order against them. I can love my neighbor as I build a fence. I can love my adult child as I say, you can't live here anymore, right? I can love my coworker as I say, I'm not going to continue to do your work. This is your part. I'm going to do mine. So love and giving are not equal. Right? Giving is different than love. So let's keep loving, right? But let's not confuse that loving equals giving or giving equals loving. So how much giving is too much? So is the person we're dealing with a strainer or a bowl? Okay? The person who's a strainer, it doesn't matter how much encouragement, money, time, energy you put in, it's just going straight through. The bowl, well, that's a very different story. The person who's a bowl uses those resources that you're pouring into them and changes their behavior because of it. When I was in the ministry years ago, the phone rang at 7 a.m. And when the phone rings at 7 a.m., it kind of gets your attention, right? Now keep in mind, I wasn't sleeping because Ryan was up at 5, right? So I was a couple hours in already. But the phone's ringing. I'm like, hello. And it was a woman from the church that I knew moderately well. Oh, she was having a terrible morning. Terrible. She didn't like her house, didn't like her dog, didn't like her kids, didn't like her husband. There was nothing good in her life. And I was like, oh my goodness, gave her some encouragement, tried to bring some cheer into this, did a little safety coping plan for her, said goodbye. She was like, thank you so much. This is what I needed. Oh, it felt so good. Felt so good. Next morning, 7 o'clock, ring-a-ling-ling. I was awake. Hello? It's the same woman. She wasn't doing well. Didn't like her house, her dog, her husband, her kids. Same thing happened. Nothing changed. Gave her some encouragement, right? Poured some cheer back into her life, probably offered her some verses, right? Try to get her, helped her resource up. Oh, thank you so much. No one else is around for me. I'm all alone. You're the only person who listens. Oh, it feels so good. Feels so good, right? But then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, until I'm sometimes a bit of a slow learner. I'll give myself that. I learn, but I'm slow. And I began to realize, oh, it's a strainer, right? So everyone this morning encouraged themselves in some way to get here. So you weren't even aware of it, right? For some people, some of us just did it. But other people, maybe if you had a bit of social anxiety, you'd be like, ooh, this is tough, but I can do it. I know so-and-so there, right? And you made a connection. Or I always feel better after leaving church, right? I'm going to go. And so for some of us, we're a bit more mindful that, we had to kind of cheer ourselves because that's our job to do. And sometimes on those really low days, we do need to reach out. And that's why we have a community of Christ followers to get that support. And anyone here can call me at 7 a.m. And I'd be glad to support you. But you can't call every day, right? Because my job is to encourage myself. And if I'm on the phone encouraging you to get going with your day, who's encouraging me to get going with my day? I'm going to have to call somebody, right? And there's going to be a crazy domino effect in the church, right? Because when people are having a heavy burden, we are there for them. We are going to support them. But those daily routines that people are responsible for, they need to do for themselves. And then we have the bowl people. The people that when you see yourself investing in them, you get results. So we have to ask ourselves, is our giving helping people to grow, or are we keeping them stuck in those unhealthy ways of behaving? The next question we're going to ask is, who am I dealing with? And this is the part that gets tricky. And I hear giggles here because we know where I'm going, right? So givers have to set limits because takers rarely do. And is it fair? It's not fair, right? But life isn't about being fair, right? So givers have to set limits because takers rarely do. Now, takers do not present as the wolf all the time because it wouldn't work for them. So there are the very, very, very small minority of our population that just presents as a wolf all the time. But it's very, very small. Think about difficult, challenging people in your life. They know how to act like a golden retriever sometimes, right? Who doesn't love a golden retriever? They're so loyal, they're so kind, they're so sweet. We have a neighbor who had a golden, and she would tell me, she worked with me as well, and she would tell me that in the morning she would get up and she would brush her teeth and the golden would be right here. And then she would take a step back and the golden would take a step back. And then she would lean in, to spit in the sink and the golden would come, just so loyal, so together. So if you had a golden retriever in your house, we're very boundaryless when it comes to our dog. Our dog is on all the furniture. He's the most spoiled dog in the whole world. This is where we let our boundaries slip for our dog. And he's up on the furniture, he's up on the love seat, wherever we are. Like if we sit on the ground, he's on the ground. Sometimes we try to roll our backs on the yoga mat because we all spend too much time sitting. And if we go on the yoga mat, he's on the yoga mat with us. He's like a 90-pound lab, right? We're all squished on the edge of the yoga mat as he's taking up the rest of the space. And I got distracted by my dog. What was I saying? Oh, we all love dogs. So this dog is everywhere. He's on the couch, he's in our beds. Oh, he's just everywhere. And that's what it'd be like if we had a golden. I know, that golden would be all over our house. And the challenge is when golden retrievers turn into a wolf, right? And have that other side to them where they can be difficult and challenging and demanding, we sometimes do a whoopsie and keep treating them like they're a golden retriever and think oh, well, just stay, or, we'll try that approach. And that approach doesn't work so well. So often when I are seeing clients in a counseling session, they'll describe, let's say their adult child, for an example. They'll describe their adult child to me. And they will describe the most horrific story of abuse, of toxicity, of dysfunction, I've ever heard. And then they'll end and go, oh, but they're so sweet. Or you should have saw them when they were 8 years old. So charming, so sweet. Okay, well now they're 38, right? And we gotta look at this person in a different light. And so if we don't recognize that there's a wolf-like aspect, we actually put ourselves in danger, don't we? So imagine I have a golden retriever running around my house, but at any time, it could turn into a wolf. Even if it only turned into a wolf 1% of the time, imagine, only 1% of the time, I would have to still treat that golden retriever like a wolf. So if a golden retriever's in my house, he can be on my couch, my love seat, my bed. But if a wolf's in my house, probably would be maybe outside in a cage. Maybe we'd be using the electric fence part there, right? So I think people sometimes, what we do is we always like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and that's so great that we're open. We don't want to be like this rigid person over here, always cautious about people, right? Being a Christ follower, it gets a bit messy sometimes, right? And there's challenging people in our life, but we sometimes don't always recognize how wolf-like people can be and that we need to use a different approach. And then the third thing I want to talk about with a word picture is emotional hooks. So what are emotional hooks? Well, usually, if you don't know what your emotional hook is, ask your family member, right? Because that's the thing that people can use to hook us in. And I'm not saying that, all of our family members are trying to manipulate us, but they usually know what the thing is that will hook us, right? So it might start with a term of endearment, like mommy. Oh, you're my best partner ever. I don't know what we'd do without you around here. Could you, right? So I was working with a woman whose son had moved out west, and her son had a lot of substance use concerns. And he was in his early 30s. And he, when he was in Peterborough with her, she did a really good job keeping those financial boundaries tight, because she knew substance use concerns. We don't want to contribute to old, unhealthy behaviors, right? We'll keep that nice and firm. But then he moved out west. And then things started to get a bit more blurry. She didn't talk to him as much. She didn't have as much contact. So that mommy emotional thermometer, right, started to climb. And he would send her a text that would say, mommy. And then there'd be nothing for a few minutes. And so she would start to get emotionally activated, right? It's like, oh, what's happening? What does he need? What's going on? And then would come, I need $80 for a pair of work boots. Can you send that? Yes, I can. It's on, the email's coming right now, right? Or maybe 3 weeks later, it'd be like, I need $65 for a course. Mommy, pause. Can I have $65 for a course? So she was coming to a group setting. So the group was saying, wow, you did so well when he lived in Peterborough. Now that he's moved out west, some things seem to be changing. And we had a big discussion about emotional hooks. She went home, comes back the next week and was like, I get it. It's the mummy, right? So he's finding something inside of her that hooks, right? Maybe that wouldn't work for someone else. For someone else, they'd be like, oh, brother, right? One emotional hook for one person isn't going to be the same for the other, but it's that hook that happens. Megan said I could share this story. So I'm not suggesting in any way that my teenage daughter was trying to manipulate me. But she would say to me when I raised Megan and Ryan a lot of years by myself and worked sometimes 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs, and time, right? You want to make sure you have time for your kids. Right? So she would sometimes say, and this would be out of care, I'm not saying that she was, the mastermind behind the things, but it would say, I don't know if you have time. I don't want to stress you out. I'm not sure about time, but could we have friends over this weekend? You betcha, right? It could be the worst weekend of my life, but you betcha, because I don't want Megan to feel like I don't have time. Right? So we have to find out what those emotional hooks are. That thermometer might be climbing too high, and as soon as we kind of realize, oh yeah, like maybe my boss is saying to me, there's no one I can count on around here but you. Could you please do, the following 17 things, right? Well, maybe I could really help out and do the following 5 things, but the other 12 are going to have to get divvied out, right? There's the hook for me, right? Oh, I'm the best that they have here and I want to please them. So being able to challenge those things, and often the hooks are things that we value or hold dear. So if you value being a really hard worker, that's going to be a hook for you, right? If you value spending time with your kids, that's going to be a hook for you. If you value being like that stereotypical dad that maybe the TV sets out, and they're trying to hook you in with being a dad, that's going to be your hook. So how do we go about setting up these boundaries? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to admit our own lack of boundaries. So maybe when I was talking today about time, finances, mental boundaries, emotional boundaries, you were able to go, oh yeah, I could work a little harder on one of those areas. And then admit it's your problem and stop blaming the challenging people. Boy, I've spent a lot of years blaming the challenging people in my life, right? They didn't change, right? I can talk about it all I want about how difficult or challenging they are. They generally, don't care, right? And so at some point, I've got to take responsibility for my own life and say, I have to admit that it's my job to set up that healthy boundary. And then identify what boundaries need to be set up and maintained. So where do I need to put the boundary around time? Maybe I'm the person who's always late, or maybe I'm the person who's always tolerating other people's lateness. Where do I need to change that boundary? In private practice, I see a lot of people just burnt out because they're at hockey, they're at gymnastics, they're working full time. One of the little things I say is, like, let's say it's a busy mom, and I'm like, okay, so you sent lunches with your kids, your 4 kids all week? I sure did. Did you pack yourself a lunch? Well, sometimes I forget, right? So here the person is making 4 lunches, right? All the kids have lunches. They have food in the fridge, right? But they didn't make a lunch for themselves. because they didn't set that boundary of time that says, I matter too. Jesus sets up such a beautiful example for us. Here's Jesus on earth doing miracles, teaching, preaching, gathering his disciples, and he's going up into the mountain to pray and to have time by himself. Like, what a beautiful example, right? That Jesus is setting for us. That's like, yeah, it's okay for us to get away and to recharge and rebuild again. 3, tune in. So if we're not tuning in to where our emotional state is or what needs to be done, we won't know where to set the boundary. And then you have to be really clear and firm when setting boundaries with others. Number 4, the enforce part. So that's the maintenance part, right? We don't want to be slipping with our boundaries. So our boundaries are our own. Boundaries are flexible. You can change. So let's say your 17-year-old is going to be late for high school and you told them, I'm not going to drive you in. If you're late, you have to walk, right? Let's say on that particular day, it's a bit of an exceptional circumstance because the bus is leaving for a trip and you really want to see them on that trip. You're allowed to change your boundary for that day, right? But I would encourage that the more challenging the person is, the fewer times we change the boundaries, right? So if they're a super challenging person, we keep the boundaries pretty firm. If they just like to test your boundaries, like every healthy teenager does, because every healthy teenager should be testing us a little bit, right? There's a little room that you can maybe change, modify that. Number 5, thank those around you who are respecting your boundaries. So it's really wonderful to be a part of a church who does love boundaries. I was actually supposed to be in Kids Club today. So when I flipped over the November calendar, it's like, oh, I'm in Kids Club and I'm speaking. And this could be difficult for me to try to entertain small children and speak at the same time. So I contact Pastor Alicia and I said, Pastor Alicia, let me take another week. I'm going to trade off here. And she's like, oh, it's already taken care of. We noticed, we double booked you, no problem. We totally understand, right? So they're boundary lovers, right? It's like, thank you, Alicia, for understanding. Seek to understand and respect the boundaries of others. So this is where it gets a bit tricky. This person over here, remember the person who's too rigid with their boundaries? Well, they're really rigid with their boundaries, but they don't like when other people are rigid with their boundaries, right? Do you remember this person over here who's too whimsical and flexible with their boundaries? They're giving. When a giver's been giving all day, and then someone tells them no, givers don't take it well, because I'm a giver and I don't take it well. It's like, are you kidding me? I've been giving this whole day long, right? How dare you say no to me, right? But we have to understand and respect the boundaries of others. Everyone has limits. And then lastly, talk to supportive people in your life about your about your changes that you want to make in your struggles. So just on that day where I had my broken foot, my ankle's throbbing, I'm getting around with a cast and air cast, I turn to Brad and say, does this sound reasonable, right? So I had a little bit of self-doubt that happened. That's normal with boundary setting, but does this sound reasonable? And he's like, yes, it sounds reasonable, right? Maybe test your ideas up against other people. Try testing your boundaries with healthy people, with people who love you and respect those boundaries. That's a good place to start. And then lastly, hold hope that change is possible. So you might be sitting here and saying, I've struggled with boundaries my whole life. Don't worry, you're in good company. We've all struggled with boundaries our whole life. You might be saying, but you don't know the challenging people in our life. Don't worry, you're in good company. We all got a lot of challenging people in our life, right? Hold hope that change is possible. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So just in closing, and just a challenge that, first of all, I think knowing our purpose, knowing our destiny, knowing our the life of intention I want to live. What calling or giftings has God given you or talents where this is my lane, this is what God intends for me to be doing. What do we need to tweak or change with those people who might be trying to pull us off that lane and distract us from God's calling? So if you're okay, we can maybe say this prayer together. This is a good prayer for us as we think about boundary setting and we think about the responsibility that we have to not only make those boundaries, but maintain those boundaries. So are we okay to say it together? Okay. So God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. So we're going to have the baskets go around, if that's okay for the basket people. And while that's happening, are there any questions or feedback or comments that people would like to make about boundaries? Yes.
Can you please elaborate more on what you meant by the skin?
Oh, the skin boundary?
Yeah.
Yeah. So skin is like a physical boundary, right? It tells you where I start and when I do, where I end. The interesting thing about skin, it goes a little bit to touching the physical boundaries with touch, right? So I came from a family that as we grew older, we became more huggy. I think some of us, as we moved out, I moved down to the States, when we saw each other, we hugged, right? Which is like a nice change for our family. Like we got more like that. So I kind of became what I would consider a huggy person, right? What I had to learn is not everyone in the world is a huggy person, right? And so sometimes I whoopsies and I have this mistake. Someone just left our work and we worked with him for a lot of years. And there was their last day. And I'm like, oh, goodbye, we're going to miss you. And the next person behind me, a counselor, a bit more mindful of the physical boundaries at that moment, said, may I give you a hug? And the person was like, oh, yes, of course, And I was like, oh, boy, yeah, that should have been me, right? So just that whole idea, the skin is a representation of this is me, and people can't cross this barrier unless I say, yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, we got one. You're getting. I can hear you.
Most of us are of the generation, like you said, how are we going to change to get out of that gifted? If you find the next generation have set these boundaries already, I know my kids have already, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. I do agree with that. We went from this maybe over here too far where there's a bit of a swinging. Now remember, we don't want the next generation swinging over here to this rigid spot, right? Where it's like, I don't have time for anyone. I don't have anything extra I'm going to give out. We don't want to swing that. But I do see that theme with younger people that they do find they're a bit more empowered, I think, to be able to set those limits. And it's very encouraging for me. It makes me really pleased when I see my kids say, no, I can't do that right now, but I can help you later on. It's like, oh, good for you, right? Things that I wouldn't have been able to say at that age to my parents. They're very respectful, but they also can set those limits. So I think I do see that switch, Jane. Thank you. Okay, if there's any other questions, I'll be here afterwards. Thank you so much. John.
Cheryl, I just wanted to thank you so much. I think it was definitely a sermon that all of us needed to hear. I heard it at different points in our lives, and so thank you so much for sharing it, and hopefully we can implement those boundaries to be live in healthier relationships with one another, right? Okay, let's pray, and then I'll pass it over to you. Is that all right? All right, Lord Jesus, thank you so much for Cheryl and her abilities and the talents that you've given her to be able to speak so freely and openly and communicate so effectively, Lord Jesus. We thank you for her giftings, and may you just continue to bless her as she goes through her life and at work and here at the church. We're so glad that she's a part of KCC. Lord Jesus, I just pray that this last song really invigorates our heart, and may we take it into our week and apply these boundaries that we've been given and be able to set them up with individuals in our lives. And may you be in our life this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Why don't you stand with us?